Hi everyone, welcome to the second of our webinars for the Trustpilot Virtual Summit with our partners Magento, Mailer, Yieldify and Pushon, where we'll be looking at different ways to optimize your customer journeys online. And I'm joined here today by Skip from Mailer, who is their Strategy and Insight Director, who will be looking at the 4 Rs and how we can bring all of these together. We have one other session following this one today, which is with Trustpilot at 1. So we hope you can join this session too. Remember, you can access all of the virtual summit sessions using the same link. If you have any questions for Skip, please type these into the question panel box and we will answer as many questions as we can after the presentation. So let me hand over to Skip.
Cool, thanks, Joe. Good afternoon. I have no idea what time it is. Okay. I think it's good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for joining us. As Joe said, I am the Strategy and Insight Director at Mailer. And what I want to talk to you today about, talk with you today about is human conversations at scale. Why rely on the 3 Rs when you can use 4? So let's just dive right in, shall we? The agenda for today's session is what are these Rs anyway? Then we're going to get into why do we need a 4th one, and last but not least, how are you going to use them all together? So kicking off, what are these Rs anyway? So hopefully you can you all recognize this image. This is Piccadilly Circus back at around the turn of the century. That's the turn of the 18 to 1900s century, not the turn of the 1900s to 2000s century. And this was a big time in marketing for London. This is really kind of the advent of advertising, when advertising started to become a big thing. You know, of course, the first advertisement was written in the 1470s by a fellow by the name of William Caxton, but this is kind of when marketing or advertising went mainstream. And at this point, really all you're worrying about is getting the right message. Now, one of the things that I've been talking a lot about lately is how many of the marketing tactics that we use, we think are brand new. And a great example of how that's not the case can kind of be summed up in this picture. So at this time, and up until this time, it was actually illegal to have any advertising along the Thames. So some fellows bought a meat rendering company. They wanted to do meat rendering on the south bank of the Thames, and they built a building, and they put a tower in the building, and that tower does absolutely nothing other than give them an excuse to put in some glass bricks that spell OXO. So great example of how that was the first guerrilla marketing. You know, no, it's not a sign. That's just some decorative bricks we put in the building. We'll have hopefully some more examples of that as we go on. But if you look at this picture closely, what you're going to see is, you know, some things that just make me giggle. Remember, this is the time, the end of the reign of Queen Victoria, that, you know, when you could set your watch by British Rail, and yet Guinness has put a clock in Piccadilly Circus that doesn't work. The whole point being that any time is a good time for Guinness. And I love the fact that they're talking about how Guinness is good for you. In fact, many of the things advertised in this picture, you probably wouldn't be able to get away with today. Fast forward now to kind of the early post-war period. And what you see there is, again, Piccadilly Circus. Obviously, it's a little bit refreshed. Some of the same brands still there. The Guinness clock now actually works. But this is the time when databases started to be created. This is the time when we could start to collect data on customers and prospects and use that to decide which of those got which message. So we've gone from just having the right message to getting that message to the right person. And that's all based on data, as I said. So there are really 2 kinds of data that we need to deal with. The first one is explicit data. These are the questions that you ask people. Obviously, in this example, we're talking about a data capture form, but you do this in your normal everyday lives as well. You meet somebody at an event, at a networking event, or at a party. You walk over, you look in the eye, you stick out your hand, you say, "Hi, I'm Skip." Well, you probably don't say, hi, I'm Skip. That would be weird. But I say, hi, I'm Skip. And then we start a conversation. And then we start that conversation based on a question that one of us asks the other. What brings you here? What do you do for a living? Who do you work for? Whatever that question is, that's explicit data. The person answers the question, and we now have the ability to start having a conversation. Which brings us to the third time frame. This is Piccadilly Circus, kind of today. Again, you can see many of the same brands advertising in Piccadilly Circus. And this is all about, thinking about people. They're out and about, they're getting hit with lots of messages. So you've got to get the right message. You've gotten it to the right person, but you got to get it to them at the right time. If you don't get the message to them at the right time, all the work you've done to craft the message and all the data and analytics you've done to identify who should get it, it doesn't matter. If you send me a message 5 minutes after I've bought something, either from you or your competitor, that message is no longer useful. That message becomes marketing. Marketing messages, by definition, by the consumer's definition, are not useful. So how do we get stuff to the right people at the right time? So the right people is explicit data, as I said earlier, and the right time is using implicit data in combination with marketing automation. Implicit data is the data that we observe of our users, our consumers, our customers, whatever, and how they interact with our website, how they interact with our emails and our other digital marketing communications. Basically, we like to call this digital body language. So going back to the example of you meet somebody new and you're going to stick out your hand, you're going to introduce yourself, you're going to ask a question, you're going to start having a conversation. As you're having that conversation, your brain is in the background trying to work out if this person is interested in what you're talking about or not. And it's looking for nonverbal cues. It's looking for the actual body language. Is this person looking me in the eye or not? Is this person leaning into the conversation or not? Is this person, do they have their arms crossed in front of them, creating a barrier, or their arms open or not? And as humans, we're really good at reading all of these signals subconsciously and then acting upon them. So do we have to change what we're talking about? Do we have to ask another question? Maybe we ask an open-ended question that allows that person to talk about themselves and then therefore get into the conversation. And at the same time, we also have to think to ourselves, actually, is this conversation as boring as that the other person thinks it is? And should I just turn around and walk away? So all these things are going on in our minds kind of in real time, in the background, until something kind of clicks, shoots that message forward into our consciousness, and we act on it. And we have to do the exact same thing digitally. Which brings us to wine. Maybe not the most obvious segue, but wine is a great example of how all these things, the interplay with the explicit and the implicit data. So let's say, for example, that as part of the registration process today for this event, there was one of the sponsors was a wine retailer, and Trustpilot said, so we've got this wine retailer supporting the event. Fill out this questionnaire about wine and be entered in for to win a prize, maybe a case of wine, a case of your favorite wine or whatever it is. Well, you're going to be filling out those questions. You're going to be answering those questions. And in the back of your mind, you're going to be thinking, I want to look like I know a lot about wine. I want to look like I'm going to become a good customer of this retailer. So I'm not going to suggest that you would lie, because I don't believe that anybody listening to this webinar would be so bold as to lie. But you will shade the truth slightly. So when the question comes up, how much do you spend on average on a bottle of wine? You might say, 10 to 15 pounds. When the question comes up, do you drink, light and fruity reds or big bold reds? I drink big bold reds. When the question comes up, how much wine do you drink a week? Oh, I'm probably going through a case or two of wine a week. And that's great. And basically, again, you're trying to, you're answering the questions in the way that you want to be perceived by the person who's asking the questions. So same exact scenario, except instead of a wine retailer asking you the questions, now it's your GP. So you go into your GP's office, and of course they're not going to ask you how much wine you drink specifically. They're going to say something really cryptic, like how many units do you drink a week? And you're going to sit there and you're going to think, well, my church does communion once a month, and I only take a sip then. So I'm going to say I drink 1/10 of a unit a week, which is what your doctor wants to hear, but also knows that you are shading the truth. In fact, somebody told me once that the NHS apparently doubles whatever you say. Which is really embarrassing because I once went in and actually told the truth, and then they doubled it, and I walked out with a stack of pamphlets about, maybe I needed to seek help. So you're getting all this explicit data, but people are shading those answers, and what you really need to be thinking about is what's the truth, and the way you do that is through that body language. And so there you have it. That would be the truth. We observe the behavior, and now we know. That could be a really expensive bottle of wine, but if you're willing to neck it, well, no value judgments. Anyway, so it's really important that we use this explicit and implicit data together to get a clear picture of what the customer, the recipient, wants to receive. So now we've got 3 of our 4 R's. We've got the right message, that's advertising. We've got getting it to the right person, that's direct marketing. And we've got getting it at the right time, that's automation. Right person driven by explicit data, right time driven primarily by implicit data, which leaves us to the 4th R. But I've been watching a lot of Netflix, particularly Peaky Blinders, so that's what we call a cliffhanger. Before I go into what the 4th R is, let's talk about why we need a 4th one. I mean, right message to the right person at the right time, that's the classic marketing cliche, Skip. Surely that's good enough. But wait. So hopefully many of you will remember a lot, if not most, of these television adverts. Unfortunately, I've only lived here 18 years, so I only remember 2, the one in the middle and the one in kind of the right-hand side in the middle, because those both played in America. And I bring this up because when we start talking about getting the right message to the right person at the right time, too often marketers think to themselves, right, that means I can't do kind of batch and blast marketing or brand-based digital marketing. All my messages have to be targeted, they have to be relevant, they have to be bang on point for each recipient. And this is to point out 2 things. One, you don't have to be, every message doesn't have to be targeted. Because if you take that approach, what you'll find is a large part of your list, or at least some part of your list, won't ever get anything, because for whatever reason they fall out of your targeting criteria. And then the second thing is sometimes, kind of a widespread, more brand-led approach is going to be the most effective approach in that scenario. So if we go back to these TV ads worked. How do we know they worked? Well, first of all, they're still recognizable years and years later. We talked about them at school. We talked about them on the playground. We talked about them in the pub. We talked about them at work. They were so good and so famous, they got parodied. So we knew that people were engaging with them. We knew they were working. You might have guessed from my accent that I'm not originally from here. I'm an American, but I've lived here almost 20 years, 18 to be precise. And I've got a British passport as well as an American passport. So I feel that I'm able to comment on some of the differences in culture between America and the UK, specifically England. And one of the biggest differences, it relates to sport. Some of the world's greatest sports were invented here in England. Rugby, cricket, football. The problem is that at the time they were invented, you had an empire. So you thought, how can we assimilate the empire, make them kind of more English? I know, we'll export all of our sports. Well, that sort of backfired, because now they're all better at it than we are here in England. Whereas the US took a very different approach. The US invented a whole load of sports that nobody else in the world plays, but we still hold world championships of them. You're always going to be the world champion if nobody else plays it. And I bring that up because of American rules football. And up until about 15 years ago, the Super Bowl, the championship game of American rules football, tended to be really boring. They tended to be really lopsided, the scores. So you really stop paying attention to the game. But it is the day in the US when all the big TV adverts launch. People spend literally millions and millions of dollars to buy the ad space, and then millions and millions of dollars to produce the ad. If you just as a classic example of that is the 1984 ad, the Apple 1984 ad, directed by Ridley Scott. Cinematic quality, production values, literally, tens of millions of dollars spent on this advert. Why? Because they knew everybody was watching the game, and it created a buzz, and people would talk about it. And that's, again, how we know they worked. Just as an aside, I learned this the other day. First baseball game played in Oxford. No, sorry. Well, I've forgotten. It was played somewhere in the UK anyway. And the first cricket test match, Yankee Stadium in New York, between America and Canada. Canada won. So the whole TV medium and batch and blast hasn't actually gone away. We've just got to be a little bit more clever about it. I'm sure everybody remembers this ad. I'm sure everybody now has In the Air Tonight as an earworm, even inadvertently, right? Again, that's how we know this approach works. But consumer expectations have changed. Consumers expect us to be where they want us to be, when they want us to be there, talking about what they want to hear, and increasingly on a channel or in a context that works for them at that moment. So they want it to be, not just the right message to the right person at the right time, but it's got to fit with whatever it is they're doing at that moment. One of the ways that manifests itself can be seen here on iPlayer. Now, we've all had this situation. You start watching something on TV, you get a little bit tired. So you pause it on the TV, you pick up your laptop, you go to bed. I'm going to finish watching it in bed. But you fall asleep, so you miss the last bit. So, right, not a problem. You get on the train, now you're going to watch the rest of it on the train. But you don't quite get to the end before you get off the train, so you close down the iPad, you pick up your smartphone, your iPhone, whatever it is, and you're watching it. You're one of those people with your heads buried in your phone walking, down Oxford Street. That is the customer expectation. And that expectation isn't just for iPlayer or Netflix or Spotify, it's for everything. They expect us to be able to deliver a consistent experience and recognize them across all the channels that they want to be on. So when we at Mailer talk about omni-channel, what we're talking about is not being available on every channel, but it's every channel that the customer wants you to be on. Which brings us to the fourth R. So in this bottom right-hand corner, hopefully many of you saw this when this ran in Piccadilly Circus. One of the goals of this BA campaign was to get people to look up. It was to get people to get their heads out of their phones. Because by the time this ran about 2 years ago, literally in Piccadilly Circus, if you took an aerial shot of it, all you'd get is the back of people's heads because they were literally walking through with their faces stuck in their palms. Now, what's cool about this advert is it's contextual, but slightly different contextually. It's not necessarily in the context of the recipient of the advert, the person looking at the billboard. It's in the context of the plane above the billboard. So as different BA planes flew over, the messaging on the billboard changed to reflect the actual flight details of that plane. So in this one, it's, oh look, it's BA 475 from Barcelona. There was another one that if you travel for business, it was an absolute tearjerker, but it's a little girl coloring a picture that says welcome home and said, ooh, my daddy's flight from Singapore is flying over, kind of thing. Absolutely, if you have kids and travel for business, that one got you right in the heart. But that was the contextual piece of that piece. So how are we going to use these together? How are we going to get the right message to the right time? The right message to the right person at the right time and in the right context? Well, the first thing we need to think about is, has our marketing really changed? We've been talking about the right message to the right person at the right time for a long time. And we've been talking about in the digital space having everything be relevant, making sure that Don't be afraid to send messages that are relevant, but avoid messages that, that aren't where possible. And the reality is our marketing hasn't changed all that much. And like I said earlier, batch and blast is not a bad thing. It still has a place in your strategy, but it's a bit like McDonald's. And without knowing the age range of the attendees today, I'm just gonna go with this one. But there's a very distinct generational divide or age divide when it comes to McDonald's. I mean, we've all been there. We've all been on a night out, maybe with work. We always say, oh yes, we're gonna have dinner. We never do. We're running to catch the last train at Waterloo or whichever station you go through. And you're like, my train's in 8 minutes, but you see them. You see the golden arches. They're calling to you. They're sucking you in. And you're like, 8 minutes. Queue's not too bad. I can make it. And you run over there and you get whatever it is you get. And then you get on the train and you're the one person in the carriage with a big, super jumbo size of McDonald's fries. And everybody is looking at you like they've been stuck on a life raft in the middle of the ocean for days. And they're starving to death because they want your chips. We've all been there. We've been on both sides, I'm sure. We get home, we've had our McDonald's, we go to bed, we wake up the next morning. We know that the McDonald's wasn't actually probably good for us. It met a need, it very much fulfilled the need, and it did it very well. It made us very happy at the time. But you can't eat McDonald's every day, right? So whilst there is a place for batch and blast, we really need to think about how do we not have McDonald's every day? The other piece we need to think about is this. People still buy from people. And you might be looking at this picture going, what? How does this relate to people buy from people? Well, I want you to look at the droid on the left. I'm going to assume that everybody has seen Star Wars and knows who C-3PO is. That is the worst design for a droid ever. Now I'm sitting in a chair at the moment, but if I was standing up giving this presentation to a live audience, my leg muscles and my core muscles are literally constantly twitching millions of times a second to keep me from toppling over, because 2 legs is inherently unstable, right? Taking this somewhat ridiculous analogy a little bit further, where are C-3PO's eyes? In the front of his head. Again, inherently dangerous because you can't see what's behind you. You can't see what's sneaking up on you. Also, why give a droid a mouth hole? The droid doesn't need a mouth hole. Now, we know that there's actually a guy in this suit and the mouth hole was so he didn't die in the desert. I get that, right? But if we suspend that disbelief for a second and we're just going to focus on this droid. So you wouldn't design a droid like this normally, except when you think about what his core function is. And I say he because he's got a male voice. Its core function. C-3PO's core function is human-cyborg relations. People buy from people. People are more comfortable talking to people. People are more comfortable dealing with things that look human. So they would be much more comfortable interacting with C-3PO than R2-D2. Even though if you've watched the movie, as we all know, R2-D2 is a lot more fun and a lot more laid back. So all we're talking about here is the use of technology and data to create a more natural, more human marketing program. What we're talking about here is having human conversations at scale. And we do that by delivering the right message, advertising, to the right person through direct marketing at the right time through automation by the right channel. In other words, in the recipient's context. And with that, thank you very much. And we got some time for questions, I think.
We do. Thank you very much, Skip. That was great. Really insightful there. And so if you do have any questions, please do type them in the question panel and we'll try and get through as many as we can. So first question for you, Skip. With less than a month to go, how do the 4 Rs fit in with GDPR?
Ooh, that's a very good question. and somebody clearly doesn't like me. So I'm so tired of GDPR, to be honest. The thing about GDPR, the thing that I've been encouraging people to remember, kind of since the beginning, but definitely recently, is that a couple of things. One, especially in the digital space, there's really not much in GDPR that we haven't been talking about as best practice anyway, for years. So things like being open, honest, and transparent with how you're going to use somebody's data, asking for their permission to use their data. If you're not going to ask for permission because you want to use legitimate interest, giving them the opportunity to say, no, I don't think you have a legitimate interest. We call that an opt-out in email. Again, but being open, honest, and transparent with what you're going to do with their data. The other thing that I've been encouraging people to think about is forget about the fines. The fines are the headline. The fines is the bit that gets the marketing press all excited and kind of got us all in a tither early on. And the best part about the fines is it actually got the board's attention to what was going on with data, and gave us some budget to do what we knew we should have been doing all along anyway. So I think that's great. But the fines, again, are insignificant against the cost to your business of getting it wrong. So as Facebook would be somebody easy to pick on. I'm not gonna, they certainly haven't helped themselves, or any of us really. But if you think back to, say, the TalkTalk data breach. So when TalkTalk's data breach came in or happened, they were fined 80% of the maximum possible fine at the time, which was only £400,000. 80% of the maximum fine under GDPR for a business of TalkTalk's size and stature is far less than the £1 billion that was wiped off their market capitalization in the wake of that data breach. So the costs to your reputation and potentially lost business is way more important than the fine. And that hasn't changed. That really hasn't changed. So, if you go into kind of the post May 25th era thinking that way, then actually, if you go back to the 4 R's and you are able to deliver the right message to the right person at the right time and in the right context, in other words, if all of your messages are useful, it's highly unlikely they're going to complain. No complaints mean you probably don't have many problems, but also you're rebuilding the trust that they have, or they used to have in marketers, by using their data professionally, using it wisely, and delivering value to them for that in exchange for that data.
Great. Okay, we've had another one in. How is a marketer meant to keep up with all of this?
How is a marketer able to keep up with all of this? Okay. So actually, that's an interesting question, because I just realized I sort of failed on a little bit of a promise I gave at the beginning of the presentation. So I talked about the OXO Tower being the first example of guerrilla marketing. If you look at getting messages to the right person, there are loads of examples of direct marketing and direct response advertising that go back literally to the oldest example of direct response advertising dates back to 1000 BC, when an Egyptian nobleman lost a slave. A slave ran away or got stolen or went missing in any case, and posted a sign outside of his door that said, "If you know where my slave is, knock on the door and I'll give you some money." So, we've been doing this for a long time. Funny enough, since I'm here with Trustpilot, the first example that I've been able to find of social proof actually comes from the 1700s in Edinburgh, where they were segmenting their data, again, segmenting data in the 1700s, and delivering a message about a really high-end product to the, I'm sure they didn't call them high net worth individuals then, but that's what we'd call them now. And saying that, oh, this product is in use in the royal household, it has this royal patent, and then getting a notable person from Edinburgh to write a testimonial about how great the product is. So I think a lot of the stuff that we're doing that we think is cutting edge and we think is all very challenging isn't. I think it's not cutting edge in any case. A lot of it's been done before, and sometimes I think we've lost our way a bit. We tend to make the current stuff we have to deal with harder than it is, which means when we try to look at something new, we end up overwhelming ourselves and can't deal with the cognitive load of that. It's sort of like my brain has too many tabs open. So in terms of keeping up with it, focus on the basics. Don't sweat just focus on the basics and make sure you're getting your basics right. And that gives you the capacity, the cognitive capacity, or the tab capacity, if you will, to start adopting some of these new things, new tactics, new strategies, new techniques.
Okay, great. And we've got one last question. How many automations is too much? When should marketeers know when to stop avoiding getting into personal space and scaring customers?
That's great. That's a great question. That's kind of two questions baked into one. And I'm actually going to answer the second one first, which is, how do marketers know when they've, to paraphrase, how do marketers know when they've crossed that line into creepy? The first thing I always say to my clients is, if you're thinking about a new marketing strategy, think about how you would explain it to your gran or your mom or your auntie, or the person that doesn't really know what you do, the one that always describes your job as either, oh, he's in marketing, or my personal favorite, he's in computers. Because if you can explain it to them and they don't freak out, then you've probably not crossed into creepy. If you can't explain it to them without them freaking out, can you then get them back off the cliff edge of freaking out by giving them more information? And if you can, then you need to think about giving that level of information to your customers. How much is too much is really a function of where's your control threshold. I work with a lot of clients that have tons and tons, literally tens and tens and tens, 30, 40, 50 automated programs all going on at once. They all could interact. And the one thing they have to be willing to do is kind of give up a bit of control, because it's entirely possible that 2 or 3 of those automation programs could trigger an email in the same day to the same person. But again, if they're all relevant, that's fine. And if they understand why they're getting it, that's probably fine too. Would it be better if you could batch all those different messages up together? Sure. If today's not your birthday, is it?
Nope.
No? Well, let's pretend. So everybody, today is Joanna's birthday. And of course, I had to come over today to do this event with them. And so we had a client and prospect event a couple of weeks ago. And I was a little short. And Joe was really generous and loaned me a tenner for my lunch. None of this, except for the middle one, is true. But if this morning when I woke up and you woke up, in your mind, you would have been like, that guy still owes me that tenner, and he better show up on time for my event. And you would have no idea if I knew it was your birthday or not, right? When I woke up, I would be like, I still owe you that tenner. Well, better not be late for her event. Oh, but it's her birthday. And as a marketer, I go through this kind of hierarchy, right? Wish her happy birthday. She feels good. I feel good. No cost to me. Okay. Call her about the event. Well, it's good if I get there on time. That's important. But she could tell me I have to change all my slides. Yeah, maybe I'll just text her about the event. That way she can't come back with a big long thing. And then, sure, I feel honor bound to pay you back the tenner, but then I have to, do I have time to go to the ATM on my way here, whatever. So as a marketer, I'd probably go with, you know what? 2 of those messages cost me something. I'm just going to wish her happy birthday and forget the other 2, right? And the reality is you as the recipient want all 3. Now, as I said, if I could have batched all 3 together, gave you a quick phone call and said, hey, don't worry, I'll be there at 11:30, and I've got your itinerary already, and oh, by the way, happy birthday, that would have been ideal. But if I can't do that and I got to send it as 3 separate things, you're not going to be that much more bothered.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
You're going to get a flood of happy birthday messages now.
It's not my bad.
Take it. Take it whenever they'll give it.
Great. Well, thank you, Skip. I think that was really, really insightful and very, very animated. So thanks very much. There aren't any other questions at the moment, so I think we're good to wrap up and just say thanks for joining us. We have our next session at 1, which will be with ourselves, Trustpilot. We have Alan, who'll be talking about how customer reviews can be used throughout the customer journey. So hope you can join us for that one. And thank you for joining. Thank you, Skip.
Thanks for having me. If any other questions come up, my Twitter handle's there. Just tweet me and I'll get back to you. Or tweet Trustpilot and they'll call me.
Great.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.